I am now honored to introduce presidential candidate and keynote speaker Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek Ramaswamy is a New York Times bestselling author and a successful entrepreneur who has founded multiple successful enterprises. He is a first generation American and the founder and executive chairman of Roivant Sciences, a new type of biopharmaceutical company focused on the application of technology to drug development. He has authored numerous articles and op-eds which have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, National Review, Newsweek, and the Harvard Business Review. So, all of you, please put your hands together for Vivek Ramaswamy.
Thank you, and namaste and namaskaram to everybody. I wanted to thank Renu Gupta, known to me as Renu Auntie, for actually connecting me with the group, and it's good to be back. I've spoken to you all before, but it's good to talk to you now in a new capacity. I just wanted to share with you a number of reflections that will have, I think, very little to do with partisan politics. This is not the place for that. I'll follow up with many of you regarding the specifics of my political journey and hope to pursue the presidency, but that's not what we're talking about today. What I'll talk to you about is a part of my message that relates to rediscovering purpose, rediscovering our sense of meaning and purpose and identity as Americans and as individuals, and a big part of what my own Hindu faith has taught me in giving me my own sense of personal purpose. And one of the values that I think is important to all of us as Americans, which I'll be the focus of my remarks, which is the revival of merit in our culture. So we'll take about 10 to 15 minutes, and I look forward to following up with many of you offline so we can have longer conversations outside of today. What I see in the landscape today is a group of people my age and younger in America. And by the way, I'm 37 years old. I'm the first millennial ever to run for US president as a Republican. And what I see amongst people my age, really every age in this country, is that we're hungry for a cause. We're hungry for purpose and meaning and identity at a point in our national history as Americans when the things that used to fill that void of purpose, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. When these things disappear, that leaves a black hole, a vacuum in its wake. And it's when you have a vacuum that runs that deep that poison begins to fill the void. It almost doesn't matter what the poison is. Pick your favorite one. That's what fills the void. We suffer an epidemic of anxiety and depression, a mental health epidemic in this country, hungering to be part of something bigger than ourselves, yet we can't even answer who we really are. What I used actually spoke to a Christian audience at a church in Iowa recently, and I'll share with you what I shared with them. What I see in the American landscape today is a bunch of us that are flying around lost in some cave like a bunch of blind bats. How does a bat figure out where it is? It can't see, it doesn't have eyes. So it sends out sonar signals and it bounces off something that is fixed, and then that bounces back and tells the bat, this is where I am. I think we human beings do the same thing. We send out these signals and they bounce off things that are true, things that are fixed. They bounce back and tell us this is where I am. Say my family, the two parents who brought me into this world, the children who I brought into this world, they're real. That's true. That means something to me. That bounces back and tells me this is where I am. My belief in God, that is true. That faith is real. That means something to me. That bounces back and tells me this is where I am. I send out a signal. It bounces off of my conviction in this nation, that I'm a citizen of this nation, that means something to me. That bounces back and it tells me this is where I am. That I work hard. I create something in the world that I'm truly proud of as an individual. Send out that signal. It bounces back and tells me this is where I am. What happens when those things disappear? The individual, faith in God, family, belief in the nation. What happens when these things disappear? We send out these signals and then nothing comes back. And that's why we're lost in that abyss. And so we latch on to new identities, group identity, our genetic identities, our tribal identities, our hunger for finding causes that we want to believe in that are secular or civil rights causes that we latch onto. Well, what happens then when we reach the promised land of civil rights? What happens when we have true equality before the law? What happens when we've staved off what we worried about in the 1970s in this country? If you look at the cover of Time magazine or Newsweek magazine in the 1970s, there was actually a real concern about climate change. If we didn't stop using fossil fuels, we were going to have a global ice age. Time magazine, Newsweek magazine covers had a picture of a global ice age, global freezing. But what happens when you stave that off? You arrive at the next concern. So I think these are just symptoms of our deeper hunger for purpose and meaning. And the question for us is, how do we satisfy that hunger with something more meaningful that dilutes the poison, whatever the poison is? How does it dilute that poison to irrelevance? I think, speaking in the American context, an important value for me is the revival of the American ideals themselves. And those are ideals that I know many of us on this call share in common. Myself, I was born to two parents who came to this country. I know there are people on this call who made that same journey as my parents, traveling oceans to become part of the United States of America. That takes courage. And I think there's a reason why many of you came here. There's a reason why my parents came here. This is a country that's built on certain ideals, such as the pursuit of merit, meritocracy, the pursuit of excellence, that means something. Maybe even if we're being really honest about it, recognizing that for many people who choose to come to America from India, that India, though it could have been that place, maybe can still be that place, wasn't so perfect in allowing people to get into college or get a job based on truly meritocratic criteria. So they come to other places like the United States where we thought we could do that. But what I worry about, and I say this now as somebody who's lived the full arc of the American dream here on American soil, is I worry that America may soon have to learn some of those same lessons through the anti-meritocratic policies that we're now creating in American cultural life. What is merit, you might ask? It's a question I often get because I talk about the importance of restoring merit, the importance of putting merit back into America. A funny thing actually about America's root word, not a lot of people know this. America was derived, it was named after Amerigo Vespucci. He was the explorer who first discovered the American soil long before Christopher Columbus did. And his name was derived from a word called Amalric, from his grandfather whose name was Amalric. And Amalric means, Rick means master, Amal means work. So at the root of America was actually the master of work. I know that speaks to many of us, first generation Americans and immigrants who come here who value hard work. So when I talk about putting the merit back into America, what does merit mean? To me, it means that it's a system when anybody can reach the fullest of their God-given potential without any other human being or man-made system getting in their way of achieving that potential. Through hard work, through commitment, through dedication, through God-given gifts, different as those God-given gifts may be in each of us. Meritocracy is the system where each of us is fully free to achieve the maximum of our God-given potential, whatever that might be, without any human being and any human-made system standing in our way. Well, I think that today we live in a country, in America, that was the best possible version of that story. Yet it's right when we reach the promised land that we start to make the same mistakes that caused us to escape from an unmeritocratic system that we might have had in the past, creating new race-based quota systems in America that say that, you know what, you don't just get ahead on the content of your character, but that the color of your skin matters too. Mistakes that I think America would do well to learn from even places like India, that to say that just because you've made mistakes in the past doesn't mean that you fix those mistakes by making the same mistakes in reverse or in another direction all over again, but rather to value each person as an individual, not as some member of a tectonic plate of group identity, whatever that group identity may be, but to say that you are you. There will only ever be one you. You're not riding some tectonic plate of group identity. You're endowed by your creator, by God, with your own innate potential. that there will only be one you, and with your own free will, with your own freedom, with your own dedication, that you can achieve anything you ever want in the world with your own hard work, your own commitment, and your own dedication. That's what we call the American dream. It's what I think so many of us have lived. It's what I've had the honor and good fortune of living in my life as well. And I hope that that is what many of us as first-generation Americans and immigrants can play a role in helping restore in this country as well. And the number one criticism that I hear of this view, and it's a fair one, is that nations like America, America in particular, is imperfect. America is flawed. It is hypocritical. How could a nation founded on slavery talk about, they will say, I don't believe it was founded on slavery, but founded on slavery, now preach about the virtues of meritocracy without rectifying those past injustices? It's an interesting claim. It's worth contending with. It's true that our founding fathers in America who wrote the Constitution were imperfect human beings. Many of them talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness while owning slaves. But there's something interesting you'll see for certain. Can you hear me? Oh, sure. Good. I'll just, wrap this up and we'll continue the dialogue soon. There's something interesting, though, that I wanted to point out about something that a select number of nations around the world share in common. America's one of them, but India's on the list too. Israel's on that list too. Countries that are consistently accused of being hypocritical. And there's something interesting I find as a common thread that I draw through the countries that are most accused of being hypocritical. They're also the nations that actually were the closest to living up to their ideals at all. And isn't that interesting? So what I think about in the American context, and I think this every bit applies to India, I think there's a version of it that applies to Israel too, is our worst hypocrisies, our worst failures, the fact that America had systemic racism in the form of slavery back at its founding, the fact that India, even at its founding, was imperfect in treating all of its citizens equally. That fact is actually the best evidence that we have ideals at all. Because in order to be called a hypocrite, at least you had to have the ideals in the first place. Go with me for a thought experiment. Try me. I'll stand by and wait if somebody wants to give me an example, but I don't think I could find an example if I tried, and I have, of finding somebody who would complain about the Chinese Communist Party or Iran or Pakistan. And I know you're not supposed to say that, but I will. Who's calling ever the Chinese Communist Party, or Iran or Pakistan or any range of other countries hypocritical? You won't hear it. Why do you hear it? Is that because they're living up to some sort of standard of human equality and civic respect that we're missing out for here in the United States or in India or in Israel for that matter? No, it's not why. The reason is in order to be a hypocrite, you had to have the ideals in the first place. And that's the beauty of America, is it is a country where we do have ideals, but we're not a country of gods. We're a country made up of, just like India and every other country on this God's green earth, we're a country made up of human beings. So if you have a country founded on ideals, and a country that's populated by human beings rather than gods, then you're always going to fall short of those ideals. By definition, that is what it means to have a country that has ideals and to be populated by human beings. You will always fall short of those ideals. But the beautiful thing about America is we're still the country where we're not built on perfection, but we are built on the pursuit of perfection, the pursuit of a more perfect union, the pursuit of liberty, equality, and justice for all. That's actually what it means to be an American. And so I think that many of us know that in our hearts. Many of us, parents' generation who chose to come here, many of us who were born as first-generation Americans, we know that more deeply than perhaps even my kids' generation or many other fellow Americans who may have inherited a country. There's something to be said for valuing a country that you chose to be a part of. And those of us whose families have made that journey, I think, bear a special obligation to breathe that civic lifeblood back, to breathe that vision of the ideals of a country that if you're just inheriting it, you might naturally forget. But if you made the choice to actually come to, you see something about it that somebody who just inherited might have long forgotten. And I think there's one obligation that we share above all else to this country, either as immigrants or as first-generation Americans, and I think especially true in a certain way of Indian Americans, who have seen what an anti-meritocratic, reservation, genetic identity-based system looks like somewhere else, to come to this country to say that, yes, this is the country founded on the unapologetic pursuit of excellence. Putting merit back into America, each of us bears the responsibility of doing that, not just by living the American dream ourselves, but by unapologetically embracing it as we raise our kids, as we become members of our communities. And hopefully we will ourselves play the role in breathing the merit and the American lifeblood back into America itself. So, Renu Auntie, Utsav, entire community, I'm so grateful for Hindu Act and for all that you all do. I would love to have more of a conversation, but as best we can via Zoom, we'll end it at that for today. And as I said, my colleagues will be in touch for the part of our journey to the White House. That's not what's going on today, but we'll be in touch and look forward to following up with you, hopefully partnering with you. And as I say, it's not being done by us, it's being done through us. And part of being done through us, I mean, is in the sense of it's being done through us by God. But I view that even in this community, as many of you are picking me up as well and putting me in the position to achieve, hopefully, what I'll be able to achieve in making my small contribution to this country as well. So
thank you so much, Vivek.
thank you all. I appreciate it.